Welcome everyone to our study of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities, the Kangyur Rinpoche, and with the commentary by Longchen Yeshe Dorje, Kangyur Rinpoche. And I'll just briefly go over what it is that we're doing here, which is in the context of our study. We are up now to chapter 9. Now, the progression of the subject matter here is essentially, you could say, there's three main themes that are to be sort of investigated here. And that is, you could say, the approach to the path of liberation according to three different capacities, three different kinds of individuals. So the first is the kind of individual that would just like to be happy. And that implies also, you could say, the more religious theme that we have throughout various religions, then to wish to, when we pass away, then to go to heaven, to have a good rebirth, so to speak. And the greater theme that we have within the Buddhist context is that we'd like to be free from suffering altogether, from the cause of suffering, from samsara. And that's you could say, there's a greater perspective in that. I don't know if you can hear it, but my neighbor's working with a chainsaw outside. I hope it doesn't disturb it's disturbing me a little bit, but I don't think it's not going into the microphone. Huh? Okay, good. I'll see if I can kind of stay focused. Anyway, so you have those who wish to be free from samsara altogether. That's the second kind of individual, second kind of capacity. See, the third kind of capacity is the understanding that everybody is suffering here. And so we'd want everybody to be free. And that's where we have then the theme that we're presently discussing, the bodhisattva approach. The commitment to bodhicitta, which is the wish to establish all beings in enlightenment. So you can see that's a very great motivation. But the others also are completely understandable. And, you know, we might not come across even this idea that we could do something for others. We might just think, well, what could I do? And give up, you know? The Buddha's proposition is this extremely creative vision of how it's, in fact, when we're embracing others, that at the same time, also, we're embracing our own cause. Now, in terms of the structure of this particular work, it very much aligns with the practices as we find it in the what we call ngundro, the tantric preliminary practices, where the reflections that precede the actual main ngundro consist of first thinking about the preciousness of the human rebirth. And that's where, again, that's where we are already engaging into a vision that goes beyond an understanding. But I'd like to argue this understanding is not just based on belief, but it's actually based on analysis of our reality and identifying the primacy of the experiencer as the one that constructs reality, not vice versa, that our body constructs consciousness. It's consciousness that constructs all of our reality. So, but that's something that we need to embrace on the basis of reasoning, because if we just embrace it on the basis of, well, you know, the Lama is very nice and all of that, then the day that we're angry at the Lama, or we're not particularly, you know, pleased or whatever, and then we'll say, oh, you know, chuck all that whatever the Lama said or whatever. But if we really actually understand the logic and the, you could say, science of the primacy of consciousness, then the entire teaching that we have in the Buddhist context makes so much more sense. All the descriptions of samsara and nirvana, the qualities of samsara, or the defects of samsara, the qualities of awakening, all of a sudden make perfect sense if we understand how it's our mind that can go into confusion. It's our mind that can be free of confusion. It's our mind that creates these worlds, and so on. So that's where understanding the situation with having been reborn as a human. And not only that, to be reborn as a human with these particular leisures and advantages, freedoms and advantages, as we call them, is understanding the incredible fortune we have. And then reflecting on also something that is something we forget is how impermanent this is. How many people do we know who have passed on, and how we're living constantly with the awareness that we're not going to be here for that long. As you get older, you become more and more aware of that, time begins to pick up in terms of its pace. And so the years roll by. And so that's where impermanence is an important reflection. So these two, in the context of this work, we say this constitutes then the mind turning towards the Dharma. And it's then in the context of the Dharma that understanding the ethics, that's understanding the law of karma. That's where we can understand what it is that will give us a higher rebirth. Then reflecting on the suffering of samsara, we understand we want to get out. And that's the second kind of attitude. The first with ethics, higher rebirth, happiness, heaven, whatever. Then reflecting on samsara's defects, then we wish to get free altogether from samsara. And then when we come to taking refuge, then in this context, refuge is already defined as the entering into the Mahayana. It's taking refuge for the benefit of all sentient beings. We take refuge together with all sentient beings. And it's then this which is further consolidated through the path of the Bodhisattva, the path of the Mahayana, with bodhicitta really as the core inspiration. So that's what we're looking at. And following taking the vow of bodhicitta, we're now looking at the precepts of what we call bodhicitta of aspiration and bodhicitta of application. And so in the context of the bodhicitta of aspiration, we're now looking at what we don't want to be doing when we practice, or rather, what are the do-nots that we're looking at. So we're looking at the sort of things that will, you could say, interrupt or damage our bodhicitta resolve. So before we go further, then to the actual study, let's just invoke the presence of wisdom as embodied in Manjushri with a short supplication. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So I'll just set up the screen here. Okay. So here in, well, let's just see, the context is now the precepts concerning what is to be avoided. Actually, let me just, there's just an important point actually in just above, where when in discussing bodhicitta, then it says, it talks about how important it is to actually cultivate this attitude, but then it says, nevertheless, simply maintaining bodhicitta and its connecting trainings so that they do not decline is not sufficient Jigme Lingpa requests us to follow a spiritual friend with great earnestness and to hear and reflect upon his or her teachings. He exhorts us to implement all the teachings of the Mahayana, accumulating wisdom and merit, purifying downfalls and obstructions, and enhancing our bodhicitta, its attending trainings and all favorable conditions. So that's why it's important to understand we have a living tradition. And that's where we actually don't just have a brilliant theory, but very often theories, they seem to fail miserably in the realm of humans, you know, or it does happen, and it helps a lot when there's somebody who actually has genuine experience. So if you're building a house, you know, you might buy a book, do it yourself, build a house. But, you know, if you have somebody who's a builder, an architect, and so on, it makes a vast difference. If we're looking on the path of enlightenment, to actually see somebody who has embodied that, embodies the path and the qualities of awakening, that makes a vast difference. So, and in addition to that, then all the conditions have to be there. And that's what we're now looking at specifically. We're going to look at the precepts concerning what is to be avoided. So that's where the root text reads, in this connection, 20 downfalls are to be repudiated. The 5 of kings begin with the taking of wealth that has been dedicated to the triple gem. The 5 of ministers begin with laying towns and regions waste. The 8 of ordinary beings begin with teaching emptiness to those with untrained minds. And then to these is added the abandonment of bodhicitta, both in aspiration and in action. So as you can see, the first applies to, you could say, people of great influence, kings and ministers. But that's also important. And you could say societies very often are influenced by those who sit and make the decisions. So it's an important point, really. Of course, this is situated within a more feudal context of ancient India. It's actually interesting that Tibetans adopt very, very much this sort of Indian, you could say, universe. Anyway, with regards to this, then, in the commentary by Kangyur Rinpoche, it says, in the scriptures generally, it will be found that a total of 20 bodhicitta downfalls is mentioned. The Akasha Garbha Sutra gives 18, and to these a further one is added in the Maha Guya Upayakoshalya Sutra, and another in the Ratnakuta. So these are really this is just referring to the scriptures. Okay, then 5 actions, beginning with the confiscation of religious property dedicated to the 3 jewels, are the downfalls of a king. And again, this is where it's significant that the rulers, the important persons who are Buddhist, since they actually shape very often the decision makers, the governments, right? They have a big influence on how you could say, the infrastructure of our societies work. So that's why that's not insignificant. It's not like the Buddha's only talking to some of the VIPs, but it's simply just being very practical about the social implications. So that's where the root downfalls of a king are so called because people in positions of power are liable to commit them. But of course, they're downfalls for anyone who has taken the Bodhisattva vow. They cause beings to fall from higher, happy state of gods and humans to lower realms, destroying all the cultivated roots of merit that empower or crown the royal lineage. So the downfalls are, okay, let's go to that. Okay. The downfalls are, with evil intention, to take the property of the 3 jewels or to induce others to do the same. Basically robbing the temples and robbing those who are practitioners and so on. This covers the theft of images, books, articles pertaining to a stupa, the goods belonging to the Sangha or the spiritual master, and so on. 2, to repudiate any of the 3 vehicles or to lead someone into the belief that they do not constitute the path of liberation. By the way, let me just say, if some of you have the good fortune, I'm making an advertisement. This is a spot for a place where you can get very, very good thorough teaching along the lines of what we're discussing here, which is Finding Rest in the Nature of Mind by Longchenpa, with the commentary by Woolston Fletcher. You know, the Longchenpa's beautiful Lamrim, Finding Rest in the Trilogy, what's it called? Finding Rest in the Nature of Mind, the trilogy, also Korsam. If you go to maitrikara.co.uk, ask them to, you could say, ask them for the recordings, because now it's been completed, this course of Woolston teaching Finding Rest in the Nature of the Mind. And the particular section that we're looking at here is actually found and discussed by Woolston in the context of this text, but with a lot of, you could say, reference to the Treasury of Precious Qualities. In lecture 35, I was just listening to that the other day, and in fact covers exactly what we're looking at here today. But he's just such a brilliant presenter of the material. And also, two things. He's the one who translated, together with his partner, I should say, Helena Blankletter. The two of them are really the ones who have translated so many of the valuable texts in Padmakara. But he's then, you know, in addition also, he draws on Longchenpa's auto-commentary, the Shingta Chenmo, the great vehicle, or the great chariot. So it's a really extraordinary, beautifully presented. So look at that, warmly recommended. maitrikara.co.uk. Actually, if you write the email, it's info@maitrikara.co.uk. Okay. All right. So that's where you could have additional sort of valuable exposition on this, and yeah. So anyway, so that's where, and Woolston there, remember, he was making the point, you know, we might come across somebody who's practicing another path altogether. They might be Hindu or Christian and whatever, or they might be what we in chauvinistic Mahayana language, which is actually not really chauvinistic, but it's more just that when the Mahayanas talk about Hinayana, they very justifiably identify, well, it just has a smaller scope. It still believes that there is substance in, you could say, out there. They still believe in the inherent existence of some aspect of the mind, and so on. So there's simply just a cognitive difference, cognitive. There's still a belief system at the level of cognitive obscuration. And then also there, of course, as we very often speak about, there's simply not that aspiration to wish to embrace all sentient beings. There's not the wish to remain forever to serve sentient beings. So that when these are lacking, then we Mahayanas say, well, that's a great path, but it's not quite the Mahayana. But the point here is, the second point here in terms of repudiating, is that we might say to them, well, you know, your path is invalid. And then, you know, they might just give up their path altogether. So we should be very careful and sensitive not to criticize people who are on another path. So that's where we should be sensitive. Also, if you might find people who are tantrikas and it looks very strange what they're doing, you might say, oh, that's not the right path. You know, also that's, you know, essentially taking people away from their path. So that we shouldn't do. Then it says to rob, beat, imprison, or kill wearers of the monastic robes, regardless of whether they have taken vows or not, if they have, regardless of the quality of their discipline, or force them to return to the lay status, or to induce others to do the same. So that, of course, is something that's happened in the brutal regime over the last 60 years in Tibet. But it's something that is one of the downfalls then, yeah. And again, this has to do with it applies to the agencies of power. And then to commit any of the 5 sins of immediate effect. Samengha means those that immediately lead to a negative rebirth. This is killing a Buddha, or drawing blood from a Buddha or an arhat, killing your parents, And yeah, there's 5 of them. I can't remember exactly actually last time I had it in my notes, but anyway, I think many of you would have heard of them before. And then to hold wrong views, such as there is no such thing as karma. Now that's actually, we would say, among the 10 non-virtues, the 3 of body, the 4 of speech, and the 3 of the mind. Wrong view is actually the worst, because when you get things wrong, then everything else is, accordingly. And that is, again, coming back to this mechanistic view that most of us are brought up with, which is not understanding the primacy of consciousness and how it generates re-embodiment after re-embodiment, and how the way that our experience happens is on the basis of our actions. So not believing in or not understanding the nature of our reality, not understanding the nature of what drives rebirth after rebirth. That is then what we call wrong view. And so, yeah, then let's just go back. So, of a king, 5 actions beginning with destruction of towns and regions are the downfalls of a minister, which I think are more or less the same with some additional ones. The first downfall is to destroy aggressively a homestead, a village of 4 castes, a small town or a large town or an entire region such as Champaka, the area of the Ganges Delta. The 4 other downfalls correspond to the first 4 downfalls of a king. So I guess if you're a minister, you're more sort of in a sort of executive position of implementing or, being active in these kind of evil activities. In addition to these 10, 8 downfalls associated with ordinary people. Let's see what that is. To teach the doctrine of emptiness to persons who are unprepared for it or who are liable to be alarmed, since they will, as a result, relinquish bodhicitta and aspire to the teachings of the Hinayana. And that's where the understanding of emptiness could lead to a complete misunderstanding of what the whole path is about. And simply just say, well, there's nothing there. And then just, think in terms of one's own little path or liberation, happiness. Consciously to direct people of Mahayana disposition away from the Mahayana path and lead them to the practice of the Hinayana, insinuating that they are incapable of attaining the attainment of full enlightenment, and that they should therefore confine their aspirations merely to freedom from samsara. So that's actually, saying, this Mahayana project is way too ambitious. B3, be an injudicious praise, by or through an injudicious praise of the Mahayana, to lead people of Hinayana disposition to give up their vows of pratimoksha, and thereby to leave them without any vows. So as far as I remember, let me just see, I looked it up last time. Sorry, you'll have to pardon me, being a non-native English speaker. Let's see here. Showing very poor judgment. Unwise. Yes. Yeah, unwise. So that's where, if we praise the Mahayana in sort of just a partial way, which is not how the Mahayana should be understood, but saying it's much better, your path sucks and so on, that actually could discourage people to give up their particular path. Even if you might say it's inferior, then if that is their path, we should really respect them. And particularly if they might just abandon the spiritual journey altogether. 4, to hold or teach another to hold that the following the Hinayana path does not eradicate the defilements, and to say that the Shravakas do not have an authentic path to liberation. Again, this reflects a tremendous respect for the foundational path of the Buddhist teaching. Famously, Kangyur Rinpoche, he would always refer to what we could call the Shravakayana as the foundational yana. So this is something that is indispensable for all Buddhists. For reasons of jealousy, to criticize other bodhisattvas openly and to praise oneself, not to be done. Falsely to claim realization of the profound view, wishing thereby to receive gifts and respect. You know, people might get very impressed of all the great things and profound things you have to say. To consort with powerful people, encourage them to persecute practitioners and secretly appropriate the religious offerings from oneself. Obviously, completely twisted. To disrupt the practice of meditators by appropriating their goods and distributing to those who merely study or perform rituals. And that means taking from those who are actually, hermits and practicing. I remember once traveling to Tibet and visiting the hermitages of the practitioners up above Samye Monastery at Samye Chimpu. And at that time, we actually had to hide because government officials, and these were not Tibetan government officials, these were the Chinese government officials, came to tax the hermits who barely have anything. So actually they had to, first of all, they had to pay a substantial amount of rent for being in their caves. And then they moreover had to, they were subjected to 4 hours of lecture. We sat on a ledge like 100 meters further up, kind of hidden, and just waited for these people, to leave, the Chinese authorities. So there they are, milking the meager funds of the hermits, and then also subjecting them to a long lecture. Anyway, so that's obviously not a great thing to do. But of course, that also could happen in a traditional context where one says, oh, these people who are studying, that's so important. Those people who are just practicing, never mind them. Yeah. Anyway, to disturb those engaged in shamatha meditation through the imposition of bad rules and regulations. So that's also applies to practitioners of meditation. So then we have these 8 downfalls. So that's where, such as giving teachings on the doctrine of emptiness to those whose mind are unprepared. As we have just said, to these 18, okay, these 18, what did I have to say? Although 18 downfalls are enumerated, they in fact amount to 14, since 4 of the downfalls of a king and 4 of the downfalls of a minister coincide. These acts, moreover, are referred to as belonging to kings, ministers, ordinary people, because these are the classes of people most liable to perpetrate them. But of course, it is possible for any individual to commit them. Yeah. Well, destroying villages, takes a lot of power, right? Or in general, these kind of things that are instigated by people in power. But also there are individuals who perpetrate crimes, entirely, even though they don't have the power as such. You could say the administrative powers. So as we have just said, to these 18, 2 further downfalls are to be added. These are the abandoning of aspiration, bodhicitta, by embracing the attitude of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. This is mentioned in the Mahayana, Mahaguya Upayakoshalya Sutra, and by relinquishing of bodhicitta in action by allowing one's vows of generosity and so forth to decline. See the Ratnakuta. This comes to a total of 20 downfalls, all of which are to be repudiated. So essentially the worst kind of downfall, well, the others are pretty bad, but obviously if we give up the vow of aspiration, the wishing to benefit others, then that's it. Then we don't have any real bodhicitta anymore. So here we probably have a comment from Yönten Gyatso who says, there are 80 faults enumerated in the Shiksha Samuchaya. This is, by the way, an interesting work. This was written by Shantideva. Famously, the Way of the Bodhisattva was given by Shantideva, who then disappeared into space. Eventually, he was found, and then the monks of Nalanda, they requested, please come back to Nalanda and teach. And Shantideva says, nah, I'm going to give up that lifestyle. I'll remain as a wandering hermit. But if you want more of my teachings, if you go back to my my cell, my monastic habitation, my little monastic cell. In there, over the door, you'll find a little book about training in the path of the training on the path of liberation, and that's this one here, the Shiksha Samuchaya. So that's where we have this from Shantideva, which then says, in brief, there are 24 faults in connection with happiness and suffering, meaning the faults of not dispelling the suffering or nurturing the happiness of others when one is in a position to do so, failing to serve others. And to 16 faults connected with the giving up of the practice, failure to contrive remedies to the suffering of others. These two groups together make 40 faults, further categorized according to whether they are temporary or permanent faults. They come to 80 faults. Okay. So then, practically speaking, then repairing the faults. So that's where then there is actually in Jigme Rinpoche's work called Perfect Conduct. There is actually some teachings on this. Let's actually first, I actually have it here, and like I think I was saying last time, when are we ever going to read this if we don't do it now? I mean, there's always these references, right? And that says you could read this, you could do that, And while we're not talking about reading entire works, there are actually certain sections from other places that actually we could actually look them up, and I happen to have this available for us. So let's have a look at it. But let's first go over here, just this section here, and then maybe at the end I'll go over that from Jigme Rinpoche, because we'll then have more of a sense of what this is all about. So repairing the faults. The bottom line, let me just say one thing about repairing faults, which as we have it, because sometimes we think, oh my God, I have to do all of this and that. And it's incredibly sort of, you could say, ritualistic. But the rituals have a purpose. And we should really see this as this practical means to address the predictable, habitual impulses that sometimes govern our choices. So we make bad choices. We do the wrong things. The thing is that we're not defined in terms of that. And that's where it's so important actually to have a means to repair. So that's where sometimes, in our modern discourse, which is fiercely anti-spiritual in some way, then very often we have this sort of poking fun at the practice of confession. The thing is, we all feel much better when we confess. We do something that's really stupid, but what makes something stupid twice as stupid is when we try to justify it. Or we don't do anything and it kind of just becomes part of us. So we feel shitty, even though we might not really be conscious of how shitty we feel. And it just becomes part of our person, We treat somebody shitty and you're like, oh, okay, I don't want to think about it. I'll try not to feel guilty. But we do feel shitty. So that's why it's much better to come clean. You treat your neighbor in a, rude way, and you feel shitty about it. And then you just say, oh, he deserves it anyway. And it's a good thing I told him what kind of person he is. But we feel bad about it. And it sort of gets in the way of our general sort of, we don't have a lot of wiggle room. We become rigid and stuck and uncomfortable. And that's why it's much better you go over to the neighbor and say, hey, I'm sorry. I was really acting out of line. I'm really sorry. How can I make it up for you? Can I buy you a beer? Okay, whatever, and that's where then coming clean is so important. And we also say it's valuable to do it as soon as possible. I think of it in the morning when I make coffee, I heat the milk. And when you heat milk, the wise thing to do is to clean the pot right away. It's so easy. If you leave it, then half an hour later when it's gone cold, it's really work to get it clean. So that's where the sooner we acknowledge that we've messed up and come clean, the better. So there's a fair bit of discussion around this here then in the following. So then stanza 8 says, briefly, Even sinful deeds perceived in dreams should be confessed at once with recitation of the sutra in 3 sections. So there is a sutra in 3 sections, which is essentially a confession to the 35 Buddhas. There's the story about this 3 skanda sutra, 3 Skandanama Mahayana Sutra, Pumbo Sumba in Tibetan. Is actually there were some monks who 35 monks were out. They did it terrible, and they really messed up. And they went to the Buddha and said something terrible happened. And the Buddha says, okay, acknowledge this. And then the Buddha, there was 35 of them, the Buddha manifested 34 other manifestations of himself. And we call these then the 35 Buddhas. And then before this, the 35 Buddhas, then these monks then followed the Buddha in purifying these negativities. So it says here, then, generally in the commentary, generally speaking, any negative action, included those committed in dreams, being the result of the propensities generated in the waking state, should be confessed without delay by practicing the 3 Skanda Nama Mahayana Sutra, consisting of prostration to the 35 Buddhas, confession, and dedication. It is hardly necessary to add that faults and downfalls perpetrated while awake should also be confessed in the same way. So remember again, here we're talking about the path to enlightenment, not practice as sort of a secondary project. I'll do it whenever I have time. But actually, if we're aware of what is happening in our mind and the impact it has, then just like cleaning the pot for the milk, the faster the better. So then stanza 9 says, if of the 3 transgressions, which are forsaking bodhicitta, the basis of the path, downfalls, and giving back the vows, which we looked at earlier, a downfall is left unconfessed beyond the stipulated time. We should, with strong remorse, before the break of day, invoke Akashagarbha, and with the prayer in 7 branches, mend the vow. So that's where, we'll see the commentary there then. So it says, faults against bodhicitta may be divided into 3 categories. The first is to turn away from even a single being. This results in the complete loss of the bodhicitta of aspiration, the very basis of all bodhisattva trainings and qualities. So, of course, the one thing is that we can be annoyed. We can be annoyed with our neighbor, we can be annoyed with our spouse, we can be annoyed with, the politicians or whatever. But we should never abandon them. So that's why, of course, one thing is to get angry at them. Sure, that happens. But we should always remember all sentient beings are innocent. Sentient beings, however completely messed up they might behave, they all do that on the basis of ignorance, on basic, you could say, unconsciousness. And that leads to ego. That leads to belief in a self. That leads to the kleshas. That leads to karma. So in some way, sentient beings are under the influence. And so that's where we shouldn't be angry at them. We should be angry at the ignorance. So that's where we should never abandon even a single sentient being. The second involves the commission of any of the specific root downfalls that go contrary to the training. Okay? So you don't want to back or sponsor or in any way commission any of the things that we mentioned earlier in terms of the root downfalls. The third is the complete loss of bodhicitta by consciously giving back the vows. So I'm not doing this. I'm out of here. I don't want to help sentient beings. And that's pretty bad. Sorry. It says here, let's just go to the footnotes. Okay, this is Yönten Gyatso. Yönten Gyatso, by the way, was a close student of Paltro Rinpoche and Jamgon Mipon Rinpoche. He was a very important commentator, and he wrote a beautiful commentary also on the the Treasury of Precious Qualities. It's longer. It's a longer commentary than this one here. And he says, if aspirational bodhicitta is lost, the bodhicitta vow is itself instantly annihilated, without any consideration of the time periods concerned, as when a fresco collapses simultaneously with the wall on which it was painted. The same applies when the bodhicitta precepts are given back. This is in contrast with the four permutations of returning or damaging the vow, as spoken of in the Pratimoksha, according to which vows may indeed be given back if one is unable to keep them. These four permutations are not giving back the vows and not damaging them, not giving them back but damaging them, not damaging them but giving them back, and damaging them but by giving them back. By contrast, the vow of bodhicitta may under no circumstances be returned on pain of incurring an extremely grievous fault. This is because to return the vow amounts to breaking the promise to help all sentient beings until they attain enlightenment. If, on the other hand, a root fault is committed, the confession of it, done or not done within the prerequisite period of time, is the factor that determines whether the continuity of the training has been broken. So the thing about the pratimoksha vows is that, yes, one might fail, keeping the vow of a particular kind and so on. It says, okay, I can't do that. But the ramifications are not that great. It really just lands back on oneself. Whereas with the vow of assisting all sentient beings, that will forever shape, giving up assisting and benefiting all sentient beings. Once you have been there, and once you actually were in a place where you could benefit others, and then to break that, that's serious, and that will forever remain with you. You can imagine if you're, I often think of this movie by James Cameron with the sinking of the Titanic. And in there was a long sort of Hollywood movie made about this some years ago. And I remember that in there's one character who just is only concerned about saving himself. And you just think for the rest of the life, such a person who's only been concerned about saving himself have to be so callous to not actually be haunted by that. And somewhere it will always be there. You were in a position to benefit others, and yet you just didn't want to do it. So that's where it's giving up that is pretty bad. Bodhicitta vow, giving up on benefiting sentient beings. So downfalls should be confessed as follows. The day and night are each divided into 3 time periods. If, for instance, a fault is committed in the first morning period, it must be confessed at the latest in the second period, and so forth. If the faults are left unconfessed beyond the given time limit, it is regarded as having exceeded the limit and cannot be repaired at a later stage merely by confession. In this case, the fault must be confessed with a strong spirit of repentance and firm purpose of amendment. Then the vow must be taken again according to the prescribed ritual. Now, those of you who are Vajrayana practitioners, you know that once or twice a month we do tsok. So we do once on Guru Rinpoche Day, once on Dakini Day, and that's actually doing exactly this here, coming clean. There, of course, particularly the Vajrayana discipline is very, very difficult to uphold, the pure perception. And that's where we acknowledge that, and we confess, we amend, and we repair. So that's where we do this in the Vajrayana context. If you're a monastic, then you would do also on the full moon and on the new moon, you would do the practice of sojong, which means to amend and to purify. So that's where the monastic community, they gather on these days and essentially purify any breaches of the discipline. People of basic faculties should make their confession in the presence of 10 upholders or at least one of the Mahayana vows. Okay, so if, yes, somebody who has the Mahayana vows. For individuals of moderate faculties, the prescribed procedure is as follows. Rising before dawn, they should wash themselves and make themselves meticulously clean. They should then kneel down facing the east and invoke in front of them the presence of the Bodhisattva Akashagarbha, or their Yidam deity, and reciting the extraordinary seven-branch prayer should make their confession. In this way, they repair their downfall. Okay, so that's where one is to do it in presence of somebody who has the vows. Second is to then, at the time of dawn, to invoke the Yidam, one's particular practice, or the Bodhisattva Akashagarbha, and then recite the seven-branch prayer, which is then the prayers of homage, offering, confession, rejoicing, requesting the teaching, requesting the teachers not to pass away, and dedication to all sentient beings. And then there's persons of superior capacity should confess their faults in the way described in the Mahamoksha Sutra, where it says, those repenting who would purify themselves should sit up straight and watch the perfect purity. This perfect purity they watch with perfect purity, and seeing it are utterly set free. Thus, supreme repentance and the highest cleansing. Let's see what that superior faculty then refers to. People of superior capacity realize that downfalls are primordially without true existence. For such people, these arise in the sphere of discursiveness, and like a design traced on the surface of the water, they're unable to leave behind either habitual tendencies or residual effect. But people who are still at the stage where meditation is alternated with post-meditation experience must act according to the descriptions of the Mahamoksha Sutra. So that's where, if we have that capacity of confidence in our wisdom, then we're not affected. But that would mean someone for whom remaining in perfect equanimity, both in meditation and post-meditation, essentially at all times abiding in the Dharmakaya, such individuals, yes, they would not be affected by any such downfalls. For the rest, then we need to apply the other approaches. So, okay, let's just see. I might go a little bit over time, but I thought to actually include the reading of Dujun, which is, and Dujun, which essentially is drawing on you could say, the classical teachings on this method. The general way to restore damaged vows in two divisions. First, the traditional Nagarjuna, and then after that will be a Sangha. If vows are allowed to deteriorate beyond a session, make prayers to Akashagarbha in the pre-dawn. Confess all downfalls that occur in dreams. To purify remainder, recite the Triskanda Nama Mahayana Sutra 3 times in the day and in the night. This is the tradition of Nagarjuna. By the way, I'll upload a translation of this text. It's called Pumpu Sumba, and yeah, I'll put it up in the resource folder. Dujun Rinpoche says, the conditions for the deterioration and loss of vows are these: to lose the foundational support of the aspirational mind, to contradict the vows by allowing a root downfall to occur, and to reject the vows by offering them back. If the first or last of these occurs, then at that very moment, the vows are uprooted and must be completely retaken in order to be restored. In the case of a root downfall that occurs during one of the 3 sessions in the day or night, to allow the session to end before confession is rendered constitutes a downfall. If such a deterioration occurs, one of middling sensibility must confess it before their meditation deity. In general, it is advised to make strong prayers to Akashagarbha and to unceasingly practice cleanliness or reliance upon external purity throughout the day and night. One should call out the name of Akashagarbha make prostrations, and beseech him to reveal his presence and acknowledge the purification of your negativities. Pray to be purified of all negativity associated with the downfall that has actually occurred or that has occurred in the dream state. If a sign of purification does not arise, indicating acknowledgement from the Buddha, as in auspicious dreams and so forth, then in the pre-dawn hours, praying as before, beseech Akashagarbha to arise with the first light of dawn to fill this entire world with the greatness of his loving kindness and compassion. With these pure words of invocation, signs that one's downfalls are cleared will then swiftly arise. Those of inferior sensibility should confess through the application of the four powers. The power of the support is found in a virtuous Mahayana preceptor and the inner support of refuge and awakened mind. Those of superior sensibility may invoke the presence and awareness of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas abiding throughout space, like an illusion or dream, and then repeat words of confession, followed by meditative equipoise upon the ultimate purpose or the ultimate meaning. Otherwise, if one has committed a remainder, the repetition of the Skandaka Sutra 3 times in the day and 3 times at night will purify. Retaking the Bodhisattva vows is not like the Pratimoksha system. One may retake the vow each and every day, which also causes the vows to continue and to increase. And this many of us are familiar with. When we do our particular practice, we take refuge and then we develop bodhicitta. And that developing bodhicitta, in fact, is taking the Bodhisattva vow. Even if a root downfall occurs, if it is caught before the conclusion of the session it occurs in, then through confession alone, the vow is restored. Although the mode of restoration is uncertain and dependent upon the circumstance, whenever a fault does occur, there is a remedial force that may be applied to restore it. This is a brief explanation of the restoration tradition of Arya Nagarjuna. So as for the next, let's just see here. Yeah, let's just do that. We might go a few minutes over time. I hope you're all right with that. And I do intend to include just a session with Q&A. So if you have questions, keep them in mind, write them in the chat. But I'll just do this as well. So just makes sense to do it now. So the tradition of a Sangha in 2 divisions, recognizing what constitutes the loss of a vow. The causes for losing aspirational awakened mind are the 4 black dharmas and the heartfelt abandonment of any sentient being, with unceasing shameless conduct and joy regarding the deed. To think that it is positive is a great delusion that destroys the vow. This is known as defeat. It is not so if small or medium. So that's where we abandon somebody. May you go to a hell. If you suffer, I'm happy. Forget it. I don't want to have anything to do with you ever again. That sort of, and then, then things go wrong for this person or they suffer, and to be happy about it. That is not bodhicitta. The causes for losing the bodhisattva vow include the conduct of the 4 black dharmas, and especially the abandonment of a sentient being from one's heart. This would also diminish one's practical aspiration. Actually, this reminds me of a friend of mine, Reverend Surya Das. He once quoted his teacher in India, Ninkaroli Baba, who was also the guru of Ram Das, Bhagavan Das, all these guys. But he said something. I remember Surya once quoted Ninkaroli Baba, who said something very beautiful. He said, "Never throw anybody out of your heart." Well, that's a really good one. Never throw anybody out of your heart. That we should. I've always thought that was really important, beautiful injunction. Never throw anybody out of your heart. Never kick anyone out of your heart. So that we don't do. So the 4 black dharmas of praising oneself and belittling others and so forth with the 4 branches intact constitute a defeat. The 4 branches are the following: repetitive conduct, no sense of shame, respect for and joy taken in the action, and believing the action has good noble qualities and or attributes. You know, yes, somebody suffers. Yes, you deserve to suffer. Hooray. If these 4 branches are complete with the action, it is a great delusion which constitutes a downfall. Because it has the power to destroy the vows, it is also called a defeat. If at the time the action occurs, the 4 branches are complete, but afterwards one feels shame and the wish to quickly reverse it, it is only a minor delusion. If the action occurs with the 4 branches and one feels some sense of shame about it, then after being reprimanded by another and reversing the action, it is a middling delusion. Neither of the latter two constitutes a downfall. So that's where we catch ourselves and go, oh, yeah, no, I shouldn't think like that. Restoration of a downfall. If the defeat occurs, the vow must be received again. State and confess the fault in front of 3 if medium, 1 if small. If there is no suitable person, confess with the mind. This is the incomparable tradition of Udaracharya Parampara, extremely vast conduct. If aspirational mind is abandoned, if aspirational awakened mind is abandoned, a great deluded defeat or root downfall occurs. In the presence of 4 qualified Mahayana preceptors, one must confess and then persevere in the practice of purification and accumulation. The vows must be retaken by repeating them 3 times. If it is a middling delusion that has occurred, similar to that of a defeat, it is confessed in the presence of 3 preceptors. If it is a minor delusion, for example, breaking one of the 46 auxiliary precepts or a breakdown in one's motivation, then all such faults may be confessed in the presence of just 1 preceptor. If one is truly unable to find a qualified Mahayana vow upholder to confess before, then one may mentally imagine being in the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and confess accordingly. This tradition, which requires a stricter conformation to the rules and more difficult steps of restoration, was especially created by the enlightened ones in order to suit the needs of beginners on the Bodhisattva path. Because of this, it is unequaled by any other for the needs of beginners. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that here. So, so let's see. Are there any? Let's just see. Are there any questions at this point? Let's see if there's chat. Okay, let's see. Yeah. Well, someone says, can you please write the email for Wilson's teachings here? Okay, I shall. Magic and CO. Okay. There you have it. Oh, somebody, yeah, that's right. Somebody's already put it up there. Good. Excellent. Yeah, that's it. Oh, sorry, it's .org.uk. Oh, forget what I just wrote. Delete. Okay. Look, and Zonzon's put it up there. info@maitrikara.org.uk. Yeah, good. All right. What do you mean by our reality? I mean by typically when we talk about our reality, we talk about how we, in the Buddhist teaching, we get entangled in confusion. And that's where we attribute reality to this person, what we call the self of person. And we attribute reality to what we call the self of phenomena. So these 2 fundamental delusions, belief in a self as it applies to our individual subjective experience and the perception of an outer world, that is diluted. And that's where we wish to analyze. We analyze. Can we really find a solid self? And we cannot. Can we really find a solid reality out there? We cannot. We can find the conditions that give the perception of a self. But this is confused projections. And if we analyze, we'll see that in ultimate reality, there is not a singular, enduring, unconditional self of person, nor is there inherently truly existent phenomena out there. There are webs of conditions that provide the impression that there is a solid self, there's a solid self out there, a solid reality out there. So that's where we talk about our reality when it's confused. Of course, when we talk about the intrinsic reality of phenomena, that is what we unveil on the basis of the practice of the path. Hello, next week at this time is Losar. Are you still offering courses? Thank you for asking. Thank you, Doris. Yes, in fact, next time we'll skip the next session. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's Losar. And also, I think around this time in Australia, there'll be somebody's using this Zoom account. So there'll be some program, Losar program. And if you are in Australia, and if you're up in the Northern Rivers, I think there's a program up at Lapis Lazuli. And undoubtedly, there's also other Losar programs otherwise. So yes, so this is our last session before Losar. So we'll pick up again in 2 weeks' time. Okay. Okay, I think we're good. And let's just then say, hold on. We'll dedicate the Mary. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night, realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning. May we cross the ocean of existence in that life, thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world. May we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So that's it for today. Happy Losar next week. See you again in 2 weeks. All the best.
See you. Thank you.
Bye.